Welcome, everyone. I just want to introduce Chris Davis, who's going to manage the panel and run it for us. So Chris is our Vice President of Smart Cities at CIMCON Lighting. He has over 30 years of experience in clean technology, smart buildings, LED lighting, and industrial automation controls and sections. As the Vice President of Smart Cities, he's focused on developing CIMCON Lighting's smart city strategy and creating an ecosystem of related partners. So we have a program called Near Sky Connect, which is a partner program that is incorporating sensor manufacturers, camera makers, data people, financial people, all around the Near Sky platform. So with that, please welcome Chris Davis and the panel members.
Good morning. I'm really pleased that you're here. It's clear that there are some significant advantages to deploying smart and connected outdoor lighting. On the other hand, when you look at smart city aspirations, every city is different. They have their own challenges and opportunities. And I think what the city of Boston did a couple of years ago was really pretty innovative. They developed a long-term plan. And they had sort of dipped their toe in the water a number of times doing, the 311, smart app, some smart intersection monitoring, which George and I collaborated on when he was at Verizon and I was consulting for another company. And but they were kind of point solutions. And so what they decided, and I would encourage the smaller cities and towns that are here to sort of think along these lines, is that you really need to have your smart city aspirations be part of a bigger plan. And the city of Boston, 2 years ago, they put out an RFI and they went to the community, nonprofits, commercial companies, consultancies, and so on and so forth, and said, please do a read-through of our 2030 plan, look at that, and then come back with ideas. So they really went through this ideation phase. And they said, we're not looking for proposals. We want a response that's 10 pages or less. What can you do for us? What would you offer in terms of helping us satisfy the goals and objective of this plan? And so if anybody is interested in the RFI, which was short, and the sort of guidelines that went along with that, which are really well written, they sort of poked a finger in the ribs of technology companies like us. And all the responses I have, so I'm really happy to share them because there's a lot of good information there. And they were not only looking at technology solutions, but also we're looking toward business models. So I think when you think about smart cities, and we're going to get into that in just a minute, you really need to look at, how do you put these things together? What's the business model? What are the collaboration possibilities that that are required to implement these types of things? So again, if you want the City of Boston materials, I'm sitting at the front table. Just leave your business card there, or just say, hey, I want it, and I'll send it to you when I get back to the office today. So with that, Karen, I'm going to embarrass you a little bit. Karen is the budget director for the City of Brockton. She's been on the job for 4 weeks, right? And so you're clearly putting together next year's budgets and trying to figure out where all the bones are buried, being new. But it kind of relates to what Karen talked about. So what are some of the challenges that the city of Brockton would have with respect to, let's say, funding some of these things? And what would you expect, what are some of the things that like the MAPC or the Green Communities Program can do with respect to funding some of these initiatives? So, any thoughts on that?
I have to say, being new to Brockton, and seeing that we have invested in CIMCON Lighting, and I saw Brockton on one of your slides, I'd be interested in what some of the newer applications that we could add to what we currently have, looking at different grant programs and looking at the priorities that Brockton has. As I look at other cities and towns in terms of where we can save with electricity in terms of dimming. I see that we dim to 70%, at night, and where other cities and towns are at 35. So I'd be interested in seeing what some of those differences are, looking at what are the priorities in Brockton. Are we looking at applications that can detect noise in terms of public safety? And what some of the revenue sources are that you discussed that we could, look into.
So the Green Communities program is separate from the streetlight program that I was just talking about, but it's another program that I work on with MAPC. And if I recall correctly, they had agreed to also provide a 15% funding amount for wireless controls under their competitive grant program. So that was for last year, I believe. So the next program notice hasn't been released just yet. Those applications for any communities that are already certified, designated as a green community, the next grant application round will be due in March. And they're due to release the list any day now of what the official list of what will be funded or what will allowed to be funded under that next round of grants. So we are hoping that they, and anticipating that they will continue to fund these wireless controls at some level under that program. And we'd be happy to share more information about that, I guess, once that comes out.
Yeah, Mike Strauss is a neighbor of mine in Newburyport, and Mike, maybe you could comment on how Newburyport funded the upgrade of 1,500 Copperhead street lights a couple of years ago through the Green Communities program, and then they were not done with control, so maybe you could talk a little bit about what the plans are there and share some of the best practices and maybe some of the things you learned that weren't so great. Okay.
So I think we're very sensitive to funding and money as a small city. So the Green Communities funding was very important. Being able to show our city council that there were going to be cost savings was very important. And I think that was really what hindered us putting controls on, that we see a whole range of great things that we can tell them, but we have to say, well, dimming we can't do yet because National Grid doesn't have a tariff. And so that's a saving that's going to come on National Grid's timeline, not ours. So we can't justify that today. And then I think the other things getting into the weeds of, automatic meter reading would be fantastic, we think, but we got to find the right person in our bureaucracy to say, what's it actually costing us today to do this? And to be able to do those financial things. And we haven't been able to do that very effectively. I think that's our problem, not yours. And so being able to target each of those applications and say, getting the champion at water to do the water meters, the champion at police department to say, yeah, we would really like to have these public safety features so that we can have a package to go to city council. That's, I think, our challenge.
One quick clarification. So that was what I was speaking to before was the Green Communities program specifically funding the wireless controls. They have also been funding the streetlight retrofits in general for a number of years, and we anticipate that will continue as well, the general conversion part.
Yeah, that's how Newburyport got a grant 2+ years ago for, I think, was it $250,000, Mike?
So, yeah.
To do the LED upgrades, but and photo cells and not the controls. Mark, you want to say something?
I just want to add in on the budgeting issue, and I just completed my budget for FY20 last Friday. We completed our conversion from high pressure sodium to LED in, I want to say, February, early March. So when I'm doing my budget now, I don't really have a lot of data on how much I'm paying for my street lights. So when I do my budget, I look at last year's budget, I look at previous year's budgets, and then I sort of say, well, we have LED lights and we should be saving this much money. But I'm really guessing at what my electric bill is going to be. And there's other things that factor into it. We buy net metering credits from a solar operation, so we apply those to our electric bill also. So I don't really have a good handle on what my street lighting budget's going to be. I just know it's going to be less than last year. So at the end of the year, I probably will have some money left over in that budget where I can start looking at piloting some smart cities applications to add into the street lighting. And then also with the potential for we're National Grid, so the potential for them having tariffs would also change what the bill is. So it's kind of a wild guess on what my streetlight budget is and what I can spend, but I always have a little bit of reserve built in there. One of the other factors, we've talked about dimming, but one of the, I don't have a streetlight crew. I have a contractor that comes in and does the work for me. Prior to having controls, if we wanted to shut off a streetlight, and they were filming a movie in Air, and they wanted to shut off all the streetlights in one neighborhood. So I have to call a contractor. He has to come in. I have to pay him $600 to turn off all the lights. Then when they're done filming, I have to call him back and I have to pay him another $600 to turn back on all the lights. With this, I can go sit on my computer and I can just turn them off. We had another movie where we were talking about whether they needed to have some dimming done. And so just having that control saves me money and makes it a lot more versatile for me and for the movie company, because they decided they didn't want to change the lighting in the neighborhood that they filmed this past summer.
Sounds like Air is the next Hollywood of Massachusetts.
Well, there's a soundstage movie studio in Devens, which is right next door to Air. So they film a lot in Air and Harvard and the surrounding towns.
This might be, everybody talks about, cost savings with respect to energy, and that's certainly important, but being an old factory floor guy and having had responsibility for a factory in Asia, I think that the bigger bang for the buck is on the maintenance, the maintenance, repair, and operational costs. So I'm just wondering, the cities that are here, Steve, and maybe you, Mark, when you looked at deploying controls, how much did the potential maintenance savings, which are obviously quantified over time, factor into it in terms of, reduced truck rolls and not having to basically have, 2.4 trucks go to the pole just one trip, and then Newburyport we always have a traffic cop there, right, Mike, for everything. So anything you could share on that, Steve?
We're saving roughly $36,000 a month just from the cost savings, not paying National Grid to maintain our lights. That's made the city council extremely happy. Saves SARS roughly $300,000 they could put into other infrastructure things throughout the city. Hopefully it's going to get even better now that we're going through the process. We just started upgrading, making that conversion to the LED lights. We pay a contractor now just over $3,000 a month to do our maintenance on our lights, but once they're all converted, I don't think we're going to need to do that for quite some time.
Generally what happens is, as you're doing your install in certain phases, you can submit that information to National Grid, and then they change you from the HPS tariff to the LED tariff. In Air, since we only have 520 streetlights, we waited until we were essentially done. We still have a half a dozen lights that, because of high voltage reasons, I have to have National Grid come out and convert them. But pretty much we submitted everything, and as soon as you submit it, you immediately get on the lower tariff. I don't have a good handle on how much money I've saved to date because of, like I said, we have the net metering credits that we buy, and I haven't been able to get all the bills aligned yet. But without looking at the net metering credits out of our 500 and so lights, I think I'd spent about $1,000 to National Grid in the first 4 months of the year. So significant savings, but like I said, I haven't really got all the pieces together. And Kara and I were talking about maybe trying to get together and figure that out.
Yes, there are obviously a lot of pieces that play into it, but MAPC does a pretty pretty comprehensive like calculations for all of these towns before we do the retrofits. And we can maybe, look up your numbers and get your get a refresh on those. And if any other towns have lost that or are interested in having that, it's a pretty quick plug and play type calculation, so we can help you out with that.
And one of the other advantages with the Lightingale software is the way we had done our previous maintenance when National Grid owned the streetlights is people would call the office and say, my streetlight's out, and then I'd go on Grid's site and put in where it was, and then they'd come out and fix it. Then when we bought the lights from them before we converted, people would call the town, and I'd wait until I had a list of 4 or 5 because I didn't want to pay for a contractor to drive out, fix one light, and then drive back when he could do 5 lights in about the same amount of time. So now with the software, I can look on a regular basis. I look generally once or twice a week and see if we have any problems. Obviously, they're new lights, so we did have some problems starting out with mostly with fusing. It wasn't the lights themselves, but when we added fuses to all the lights, so we did have some issues with getting some bad fuses or fuses that weren't installed properly. But now I can look and see, are there lights that aren't working, and not have to wait until I get four or five people to call me and let me know.
So one of the interesting applications that I think may be emerging as far as budgeting and maintenance goes is predictive maintenance. So if we have a smart lighting control, we know exactly how long the light has been on, how many hours, and we could possibly predict the time when it needs to be replaced. So instead of waiting for 3, 4, 5 lights to go out, you know that, you have a contractor, you might as well replace these 3 or 4 lights because they're at the end of their lifespan. So that may be something that is interesting for smart controls.
And that helps with the budgeting.
Yeah.
If I can look and say, and obviously we have new lights, so I don't worry about that now, but if I can look and say, well, I've got 24 lights that I'm going to have to replace, then I can put that in my budget for the following year.
I think it'd be useful to maybe have Air and Medford, since Steve and Mark, you've been involved. How did who are the key critical stakeholders in making that decision to, first of all, convert the lighting? Because I know it can be very emotional. It was a new report, right, Mike? Mike, you might want to comment too. And then there's always this, not in my backyard thing. So if you were, let's say, an aspirant city that's a member of MAPC, what would be some of the best advice you would give those aspirant cities to say, okay, if you're going to do lighting, here's some of the things you need to do before you really make that purchase, and here are some of the things you shouldn't do. If you could maybe share that. So who'd like to start?
So I think that the mayor and the city council were on board when they heard the money proposition. When they heard, wow, we're going to save $100,000 a year that we're just paying National Grid. And it took a long time to get it through, and they were actually counting the savings before we got it done in their budget proposals. So they actually went on pretty quickly. A lot of the delay was working with the utility company, getting records, getting bids, how much are we going to have to pay you to own our lights? All those things took a lot of time. I think the process has streamlined some since then, but that took a lot of work. Getting the audit of the streetlights, because you're buying the streetlights that are up there and the lists are not always up to date. So the lists and the wattage amounts of the streetlights may not be current, and you want to know that what you're buying is actually what's up there, not what they just say is on some piece of paper. And then there's a negotiation on have you been paying too much over some period of years because of that. And so that straightening that out was a big process and soaked up a lot of time making sure that was correct.
Yeah. Refresh my memory, did we buy the poles or just the lights?
Just the lights.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay. And then maybe all 3 cities, new report, Medford and Air, maybe you could comment on who got involved. in terms of, the citizens, obviously the mayor, the selectmen or councilmen, whatever they're called. But, kind of what are who do you need to get involved to ensure a successful deployment?
Air's probably a little unique because we are a fairly small town, under 8,000 population, about 10 square miles. So, and we have at the time that we were doing this program, we were a town administrator, board of selectmen, form of government. What you really need to do is have a champion, someone who's going to make sure that this whole process goes smoothly, which turns out to be me. But we started with, we're a green community, so we have a green community committee, and we're always looking at projects. What can we implement to save electricity and save money for the community? So the chairman of the green community program was the one who really got the ball rolling and then turned it over to me to actually make it happen. We ended up getting a green community grant and a DOER grant through MAPC to do the conversion, as well as your National Grid rebate. So don't forget about that either. I think we got about $40,000 from National Grid for converting the light. So basically, this whole project costs the town nothing. But really, you need to have either it's someone in in the energy department or facilities management in Air. It turns out it's the director of public works, who is me, who kind of pushed the whole thing through. And it's really just a project you have to manage from day one. I talked a lot with MAPC. I went to a lot of different seminars and things. Worked with Kara's boss Patrick on a lot of the procurement and what we wanted to do and how we were going to do it, and then same with National Grid. Our municipal coordinator from National Grid was excellent. He's unfortunately been installing gas mains for the last year or so, but he worked really hard with us too to make sure that the purchase went smoothly. We ended up paying $1 for our street lights from National Grid.
Do you buy those at fully depreciated value?
Yeah.
Perfect, and then you upgrade.
Yeah.
You buy an asset worth nothing.
Yeah.
And then, okay, perfect.
But there is a process. I think it took us about 6 months to go through the process.
Okay. Steve, anything you'd like to comment?
Basically, it was the same steps that Steve just spoke about. Our energy environmental lady, she's kind of spearheaded it. I had been pushing for a long time to go LED, but with the energy environmental department, they definitely helped to bring that to fruition, and it's worked out well. We were able to present our case to the council. It's the same type of thing that we showed them hard numbers, payback time frame, and it was almost a no-brainer. So pretty much the same process.
One thing I mentioned on our transition, we had no intention of putting in smart controls when we started the process. When we got the DOER grant, because the Green Community Grant would not cover the controller cost, but with the DOER grant and the rebate, and when we saw what the bid prices came in at through MAPC, we realized that we could afford to put in smart controllers. And I didn't really have Air's not a smart city. We have no traffic lights at all in town.
Aren't you lucky?
We have it's like I said, it's a small town. We pretty much know what's going on where. The police are kind of laid back on stuff that if I said smart city to our board of selectmen, they would look at me like, what are you talking about? But if I say things like, maybe we got to put a camera at that intersection because everyone's running that red light or that stop sign, they'd say, oh, that's a good idea. So that's kind of how you build in the idea of the smart city. In hindsight, I wish I had thought it through a little bit more we just did a meter replacement, a water meter replacement about 5 years ago, and we did not go with a mesh network reading system. We just have a drive-by radio system, but knowing what I do now, I would have probably picked a different solution for the water meters so that it could all be tied in together. There's a lot of advantages to having the smart AMR system for the water meters.
Maybe Alex had something you could talk about the advantages of using existing utility networks to deploy streetlight controls in addition to meters and other services.
So it's could be a completely independent mesh network that you could run all kinds of application over. Like you mentioned, metering is one of them. Other things for security. I think of cameras more of something that could provide statistical analysis of things that are happening maybe at an intersection. Like you mentioned, how many people run a red light, or how many people are speeding, or the counts of vehicles or humans in certain areas. Not necessarily a security-like application where you react instantly, like or law enforcement. Like if somebody runs a red light, you mail them a ticket. That would be something difficult to do, obviously, and enforce, and you need physical evidence that you need to maintain. But yes, like statistical evidence, how many people are crossing an intersection. We now are working with several companies that can provide counts based on per lane, for example. Like, you could see which lane is more occupied than another one. I don't know if that's a case necessarily for air. Are there a lot of two-lane roads?
No.
Yeah, but also you could see things like direction, how many people are traveling in each direction of light. So all kinds of statistical capabilities. And you could use the same network for other sensory data, like utility readings, as well as environmental measurements, for example.
When you look at smart cities, and maybe this applies more to the bigger cities, but you typically have a number of players that are involved in pulling these projects off. You obviously have the city, you'll have a luminaire manufacturer that supplies the lighting, technology controls companies like CIMCON. There's always a network involved because it's really a data play. And then you have strategic funding sources, so Green Communities Program, MAPC. There are also companies that will basically provide funding via like an energy service agreement, and you have system integrators. So I wonder if I could maybe call on our system integrator friends here at the table as to what are some of the types of roles that system integrators could play in helping cities, given they usually are. Many towns are smaller and they don't have the technical resources. So,
sure.
Yaraj or Dennis, whatever.
Sure. So one of the projects that we've done in this area, in the smart cities areas, is around a smart community engagement solution. So this is an Asia-Pac smart cities use case where obviously budgets are tight and the cities aren't necessarily looking to spend a lot of dollars to deploy hardware and sensors, but they're using crowdsourcing as a sensor because a lot of the population now has smartphones. The smartphone has the ability to detect potholes in the city. It has the ability to allow the user to post a complaint with a picture of the issue. So we built a smart community engagement platform for a city, which is then they roll out to the citizens. The citizens have an incentive, obviously, to improve their town, to report issues, which the town then takes action on. And system integrators like us will then come in, take that platform, integrate it to your back-end systems, your workflow systems, to make sure that your maintenance team is able to go out and take care of those things. A network like the New Sky network obviously helps with that if you can additionally afford the sensors to auto-report some of those things. But when you don't, you can use a crowdsourcing system from caring citizens to actually report the issue. And they will, very often they will. In fact, the city of Boston launched an app sometime back. Nigel was here, he would have talked about it. I know Nigel pretty well as well. Where the residents have an app on the phone. If they drive over a pothole, it auto detects it and sends a message, and then we have a machine learning, not we, whoever has implemented it, the machine learning algorithm that correlates. If multiple people's phones reported the same bump at the same point, it has to be a point of workflows created for someone to go and fix it. So SIs like us can help you tie all of these three things together into your existing backend systems.
George, when he was at Verizon, he worked with the city of Boston on an application called Vision Zero. And that's a U.S. Department of Transportation initiative to eliminate traffic deaths. And they instrumented very heavily an intersection, I think it was on Beacon Street in downtown Boston. And that would be what I'd call a pretty advanced smart city use case.
I have a couple ideas on the whole smart city.
I'd love to hear some use cases that are interesting, and I'm going to share one in just a minute.
So, as I mentioned, air's not really a very smart city. It's kind of what certain people say, oh, we ought to be doing this. When we went to the controllers, and Kara mentioned on future-proofing our controllers, and that was one of my main issues. I didn't really know what I wanted to do with them other than be able to turn lights on and off. But I didn't want to invest in something that like I did with my water meters, and 5 years ago, gee, I should have invested in something else. So when we looked at the options, future-proofing was really important. But I didn't really know what the future was or what I wanted to do. Some of the applications that we are considering sometime in the future is we don't have any parking meters. So if we put parking kiosks, how do we manage that information? And I was talking with Alex about this. We have a very quaint downtown Main Street in Air. And I'm going to be redoing all the decorative street lamps. Is there some way we could put speakers in those, tie those into the controllers and stream holiday music or announcements, or go to Union Coffee in the next 10 minutes and get a free latte, stuff like that you could very easily put in, and it would enhance the experience for the shoppers and also for the shopkeepers. We talked about intersections and cameras. We have a number of problem intersections, and we look at solutions, but we don't really know what the problems are. If we had cameras that could sense or show how the drivers were reacting to that intersection, you could design mitigation a lot easier, whether you need to put some sort of an island in or realign a lane, or have a left turn only, something like that. So those are some of the ideas we're looking at. Oh, we also mentioned we have a tofu. I don't know how many tofu fans we have here. We have a tofu plant in town. I think it's the largest in the U.S. And they're in a process of changing over some of their wastewater pre-treatment, and they were creating a lot of odors, especially in the summer. People are outside, and the wind's blowing up into one of the expensive neighborhoods. So one of the ideas is to put some odor sensing in with the controllers, and then we could get alerts, and then we can talk to the tofu place, and they can make sure that they're correcting whatever the problem is. So those are some of the ideas that I have, and the technology is probably either there or not too far away. It sounds simple, but I think that's the whole idea: is what can you do and how can you implement it? And like I said, when I have $10,000 left in my budget at the end of the year, I'll buy some applications. You should join our City Innovators program. Yeah, there's some really interesting use cases, and I was speaking at a conference in Amman, Jordan in September, and one of the speakers in the session that I was in was from Dubai. And Dubai, obviously, it's a monarchy, lots of money, right? And they have a smartphone app called Dubai Now, and it's part of the Smart Dubai program. And citizens from this smartphone can interact with over 50 services from 22 different organizations. So think about all the back-end IT stuff, right? So that was a pretty cool use case. And the one I really like,
Does anybody know the satellite communications company Inmarsat? Have you heard of them? Right, so they're the guys that track assets like airplanes and ships and all this stuff that moves, and they provide basically satellite data and bandwidth. And we're involved with them. They have a strong IoT initiative and smart city initiative in Africa. And they're well connected with what's called the Smart Africa Alliance, which is now a group of about 24 countries. There was a ministerial meeting of Smart Africa in May in Rwanda, Kigali, the capital. Inmarsat decided they would deploy one of our pilot kits in the downtown, and they also wanted to deploy smart and connected lighting outdoors in a rural area along a rural highway where they didn't have streetlights before. So from that, guess what was one of the most interesting to me and very human and touching use cases that came out of that? Any ideas? So if I were to say to you homework, what would that mean? So what happened is that they deployed, I think, 15 or 20 LED streetlights along this rural highway. They put in controls because they wanted to demonstrate the viability of brightening and dimming. And what they discovered is because the villages and many of the houses nearby didn't have electricity, children were doing their homework inside the homes via candles or gas lights. And so what they would do is the children would, imagine, drag their little chair or book bag and do their homework under the streetlights because they had better illumination. And so that was pretty touching. And then they decided, well, since we have controls here, we're going to make the lights full bright on during homework hours, so there's better illumination. And unfortunately, but retrospectively, fortunately, the cellular communications for our gateway was not very good out there. So Inmarsat said, we'll just fix that. We'll put in a satellite dish. And so they put in Wi-Fi. So we now go from a case of children with no internet access, no lighting to do their homework properly, now have digital equity, so internet service, all by virtue of a streetlight pole. So I first told that story at an urban technology event in California, and it was kind of interesting to compare the contrast between rich Napa, California, and this rural highway in Rwanda. So to me, that's probably one of the most interesting use cases that has a really strong human dimension. And so when you think about smart and connected lighting, you think about smart cities, it's really about outcomes. It's about what impact does it have on the community and how can it make citizens' lives better in all dimensions. So I think with that, we'll wrap up. If you have any questions of the panelists or anybody else here, this has been, I think, a nice dialogue, kind of like a town meeting, right? So any questions of anybody? Any closing remarks that the panelists would like to give? Any last words of advice?
I don't think so. Definitely come talk to me if you're interested. I can give you my card and I can fill you in on how MAPC can help your community or other communities. But I don't think I have any other closing advice.
Yeah.
I've heard a couple of interesting new use cases today, but I think in general I'm very interested in learning what other smart city applications we're looking to do. What other sensors maybe towns are looking to connect. Let me know if there are any ideas there.
And my closing comment is just as a public official, just keep thinking and how can you improve your community? Just changing from HPS to LED saves money. The lighting feel in the community changes, and think about what else can we do and how can this backbone of a control system help the community.
Yeah, the possibilities are endless, and we've got some use cases that are really kind of out there, and so the whole concept of the near sky is let's plan for the unplanned, the things we don't know, and hopefully we can satisfy those needs as they come up. So again, thank you very much for coming, and happy holidays to everybody.